Good morning to this plenary session in Strasbourg. It's my pleasure to hand over to our group president, Iratxe García Perez, who will now lay out our priorities for this session. And then, of course, there's time for your question. Merci.
Buenos días.
Morning. Morning, each and everyone present here. Thank you very much indeed for being with us this morning. In order to take a look at what's going on right now and what we're getting ready for in plenary, you will allow me to begin with something that's not really on the agenda, but it is nonetheless very important. We're talking about the European dimension, and this is our assessment of the results of the elections in Italy. It's the first time that we meet here in Strasbourg after the Italian elections, and so I wanted to convey the concern felt by the group of Socialists and Democrats and our political family, our concern not just over the results of the elections. Obviously, a political party of the extreme right has won, but it's not only that. It's also the political alliances that will now be taking place within the European Union among conservatives, between conservatives and the extreme right. Because it seems to me that the Italian elections are a clear example of how these alliances, can pan out. The alliance, for instance, with Fratelli d'Italia, and suffice it to hear what Berlusconi was saying just a few days before the election, we could easily imagine what the consequences will be of opening the door to these extreme right political forces. And obviously, they have rather extraordinary relations with the Putin administration, and anything related to Russia can bring about real problems where unity is concerned here within the European Union that we would like to stress how important that is. We obviously should think about what the results of all of this could be, because let me recall here that Forza Italia really didn't mean much. 8%, it was the sixth political force in Italy. However, they did open the door to an alliance with the extreme right, and therefore a fascist group is now leading the Italian government. This is not just a coincidence. The very first people who congratulated Meloni happened to be Morawiecki, Abascal, or Orban himself. So I think that the time has come, really, to start thinking about this very seriously and to question the European right and ask the European right, where do you want to go from here? Do you want to continue with this same kind of alliance that we started in this legislature with the pro-European forces, obviously respecting our political differences, or will you open the door to alliances with the extreme right, which is anti-Europe and which can endanger our European project? Because this means also that the right may be moving more and more towards the extreme right. Look at what happened in Greece. The Greek government itself is enacting legislation which is endangering press freedom. And we're talking here about the government of the People's Party in Europe, but the extreme right temptation is proving to be contagious. So this is what I wanted to tell you. Obviously, the S&Ds continue exactly being and standing exactly where we stood before. We want to work with all pro-European forces, and we stretch our hands out to all those who want to reinforce the European Union, the Europe of solidarity and human rights. And so, getting down to brass tacks as regards now the plenary session, a number of elements that are very important that we'll be discussing. We'll be discussing Hungary, for instance, because as you all know very well, the European Union has submitted a proposal in order to set into motion the conditionality instrument on the rule of law. And obviously, looking at what the urban government should be doing by way of reforms. But where our group is concerned, we have to be very clear. It's not just enough to make a declaration of intent. The fact that the Hungarian government is saying now that there will be setting into motion 17 reforms along what Europe wants is a first good thing. But for us, this is not credible until those reforms are really totally implemented. That means, therefore, that we must stand strict until that happens. So welcome. These reforms are welcome, but only when they're real. It's not just an announcement that can be made by the urban government. That's not enough. So that is an extremely important subject for us. Also on the agenda, we have a key debate that was at the behest of the S&Ds, in fact, on the war in Ukraine and on the very dangerous escalation that we are all witnessing right now with the annexation of 4 occupied regions by Russia, which is totally, wholly unacceptable, but it's also a reflection of the total failure of Putin's strategy. And therefore, on that particular point, we want a very in-depth debate. You know there's going to be a resolution showing clearly what the European Parliament's position is going to be on this issue. As regards visas, I'd also like to refer to this because we have to be extremely careful where visas are concerned. I don't think that this is the right time to build new walls. Those who are seeking political asylum should be allowed to do so without any discrimination. The European Union has rules where asylum is concerned that must be complied with. Obviously, things must be looked at on a case-by-case basis so as to be able to check on the veracity of these requests for asylum. But in any case, asylum requests may not be discriminated against according to the origin of the person seeking asylum. For me, this is a very important issue which I wanted to stress. Equally important is the protection of infrastructures. Last week, we had a meeting of the S&D group with the Secretary General of NATO, and we talked about the need to strengthen our security, and we must also bolster our security and our unity as regards the supply of energy. And here, I link this up with the question of resolutions on the energy crisis, and to tell you that last night we finished a joint resolution. It's been confirmed so far by 3 political groups, 4 in fact, and S&D, EPP, Renewal, and SNR. The idea is obviously to put forward a common position on the common energy policy with a top on gas prices, capping gas prices, to make sure that we have a joint approach to gas supply. And we also allude to the possibility of taking into account this windfall profit and what we ought to do faced with these windfall profits, and so also the need to have energy interconnections provided for within the European Union. This is a very important resolution which will show where the European Parliament stands before the next meeting of the Council, where all of these issues will be dealt with. Here again, we want to keep on insisting on the fact that the situation of war in Ukraine is fraught with economic and social consequences. The energy crisis is extremely important. We must show ourselves capable of giving a common response, but we should also give a common reply to these social and economic consequences I was mentioning a minute ago. Here we must bear in mind what happened during the COVID crisis. You may remember what happened in the beginning of the crisis. At the beginning, we had different national responses to the crisis in an uncoordinated fashion. Countries were going about it on the basis of their own decisions. However, at one point, we realized that the only way of overcoming the crisis is having a common European reaction. And this is what we managed to do. We got a European vaccination strategy and a recovery strategy, which was a success and showed how important a united European approach was. We're facing the self-same situation right now. We must understand that some governments that are trying to set into motion a number of plans to face up to this situation of uncertainty, of social crisis, and inflation that is hitting so hard the most vulnerable families. And here I'd like to refer to the proposal put forward by the German government last week, mobilizing a tremendous amount of funds in order to help the German citizens. But we must be understanding of it. We realize that governments are trying to make sure that they take into consideration the requests of their own citizens. However, we must understand this must be done in the best possible way. And the best possible way is having a common answer, a common reaction, because Germany will not be competitive if Europe is not competitive. And Europe will only be competitive if we all understand the principle of solidarity. And therefore, we must move forward together along these lines, and this is what we're saying in our group. There are other important issues to be debated as well. For instance, the Schengen space for Romania and Bulgaria. You know that this is a subject that we've been looking at for several months within our group. We've tried to incorporate this. It's the time has come for the voice of the European Parliament to be heard. Obviously, these two countries have for years been waiting to become part of the Schengen space, and there's no argument to keep them out that would justify keeping them out. And last but not least, the situation of women in Iran. I think it's tremendously important. We've been talking over and over again about solidarity with the most vulnerable, with women. But what can we do now, faced with the situation in Iran? Should we remain idle, knowing that there are people outside, women outside the European Union, who are suffering in their very flesh, whose fundamental rights are being trampled upon? And therefore, we believe it's highly important that we should discuss the situation of women in Iran in this plenary session in October. That's the end now. And the floor is over to you now for any questions you may have. Thank you.
Iratxe, I see. Laura, please go ahead.
Laura, please, go ahead. Hello, good morning, Iratxe. I have two questions for you. The first one.
Okay, go.
La primera pregunta es sobre esta última.
The first one on this very last thing you said about the German proposal in order to provide assistance to German citizens in order to overcome the economic crisis. And you said that the best reaction should be a European reaction, a common European reaction. Perhaps, are you talking about a new recovery fund? How should this common European reaction be expressed? What is the form it should take? And I'd like to know also whether you've spoken with Chancellor Scholz about this and you've conveyed to him your concern over this proposal. And the second is blocking the funds to Hungary. I understand that the one to take the decision now is the Council. Have you talked to the Socialists on the Council, including your own government, the Spanish government, to convey to them the fact that the reforms have to be implemented before the funds are made available? Otherwise, they would have to be blocked. Thank you. Let me answer the last question first. Yes. Yes, we have talked with our governments. We have talked with the S&D government, and we continue doing so. Because, as you have said, once the European Commission has made a proposal, it behoves the European Council to take the actual decision afterwards. Within our family, political family, we're talking with all other S&D governments to exchange positions and concerns as regards to this specific issue. Indeed. Now, as regards a possible new recovery fund, why not? Why not? This is something we've been talking about from practically the very beginning of the crisis. And we're also very aware of the fact that this crisis was already there when we began to implement the recovery fund and when the governments were trying to set into motion all kinds of actions as regards environmental sustainability, so on and so forth. And all of a sudden, we come up against this particular situation. That clearly sheds light on one thing, how important it is to have a common instrument. I don't know whether it's got to be called recovery fund or whether the recovery fund should be considered to be a stable facility in time, or is it just a one-off in order to overcome a specific crisis? That's an open-ended debate. Well, what we're considering here in the European Union is the need to have a common policy with the national governments and with the European Commission, work all of us together on something. But why not a permanent new recovering facility? And let me tell you also that within a week we'll be having the Congress of European Socialists in Berlin. This is going to be a real opportunity to engage in all of these discussions, and obviously an opportunity to have bilateral meetings with the Chancellor. The Chancellor will be meeting with the whole of the Bureau of our political group, and it'll be a significant opportunity to exchange our concerns and our views and to try and get to a common answer.
Please introduce yourself.
Maciek Zakrocki, Radio Talk FM in Poland. I have also two questions. First refers to your first remark about the situation in Italy after the elections. You express your concerns about the situation in the country, but my question is about your possible concerns about the position of the socialists in Italy or in Sweden also, why their agenda, their proposals, their program is not enough attractive to win the elections. Then we don't have that problem we are facing now. And the second question is that refers to the gas cap price. There are informations or gossips that there is a kind of split in the European Commission about that issue, and some accusations that Ursula von der Leyen is personally blocking this idea of gas price cap on demand of the German government. Can you comment this? Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. As regards your first question, perhaps the information you have is not really quite accurate, because the S&D won in Sweden, really. Social democracy was triumphant in Sweden. It won the elections in an even clearer fashion than before, but there's going to be an alliance between the conservatives and the extreme right and the liberals, which will be pushing out of the government, will be pushing the S&Ds out of the government. So I still believe that social democracy is the strongest political force in countries like Sweden. In Italy, it's true that we haven't won with the second political force there. Let me recall here that Forza Italia of the EPP is the sixth political force. So the state of health of social democracy can always be better, obviously, but right now it is not being called into question. The only thing being called into question now is the alliances that some people are going forward with in order to get rid of the Social Democrats. And that should be worrying us, not because we're being left out, but because we're opening the door to anti-European forces. And since we're here in order to defend the European project, that concerns us. Now, as regards your second question, what was it on? Poland? Oh, yes. I usually have some communication with the chair of the president of the commission, but I don't actually go into these details, whether or not there's going to be a blockade. I believe that the European Commission is working on a proposal, but that proposal would have to be adopted within the Council, and for it to be adopted or approved in Council, we need a majority that would be supporting it. And I understand what the European Commission is doing right now is trying to find meeting ground for the various different positions that obviously different national governments have. There's a group of countries that clearly has come out in favor of having a price cap on gas, but not all governments. And I understand, therefore, what the European Commission will be doing is try and find a common ground for everybody. But I don't dare speak on behalf of the European Commission, because it doesn't behove me to do so. The only thing I can do is to ask the Commission and the Council to make sure that once and for all they do get to a common position in order to respond to the energy crisis.
Okay, thank you to Iratxe. Have a very good day, and then we hand over. Merci.